Welcome back to the Politics and Media programme. If you can't afford a lawyer out of your private wealth, you better think twice about going to court with an immigration, family, work-related or housing issue. At least that's how it's going to be if the government gets its way in cutting legal aid. The grants that make it possible for poorer people to hire a lawyer. The new Legal Aid Act was defeated 13 times in the House of Lords, but the government is pushing it through anyway in order to cut $350 million of government expenditure. Last week, the President of the Supreme Court, Lord Neuberger, complained that the new act will encourage people to take the law into their own hands and that people representing themselves in court will actually end up costing the legal system more money. Let's take a look at this report.
In austerity Britain, many rely on help from the state or charities for survival. But where do they turn if they need legal help? At the moment, people on low incomes can apply for legal aid to get help with paying for a solicitor. But under rules to be introduced next month, state support will be removed from most civil law cases, including family law such as divorce and custody disputes, education and employment law, immigration unless the person is in detention, some debt, housing and benefit cases, and clinical negligence and personal injury cases. The Ministry of Justice says the changes will save £350 million by 2015 and that it is targeting funding at those most in need. Cases that involve domestic violence or forced marriage are among those that will still be eligible for legal aid. But critics are concerned the new bill will deny justice to the poorest in society. Lawyers have also claimed that the new requirements for legal aid are so strict that many victims of domestic violence will be turned away. From April, those who can no longer get legal help may turn to no-win, no-fee solicitors or face costs of between £100 and £500 an hour for a high street solicitor, a sum many simply cannot afford. Emily Churchill, Islam Channel.
So, is it one law for the rich and no law for the poor? With me to discuss this in the studio are Sulema Jahangir, a family law solicitor, Jonny Mulligan, a campaigner against legal aid cuts, and on the phone we're joined by Omar Faruk, who's a barrister at Stand Chambers, as well as being an executive member of the Conservative Muslim Forum. Sulema, what impact would this have on your work and your clients? Now, what would it be like compared to what you can do now to what you could do after this act is passed, if it is passed?
Well, John, at the moment what's happening is that people who are poor, and especially women who are usually the primary carers of children, are eligible for legal aid for issues of custody and for contact with children and financial relief in divorce cases. What's going to happen after this bill is passed, this bill comes into effect, will be that they will have to prove domestic violence. And in cases of domestic violence, yes, women will still be eligible for legal aid. And the restrictions for the evidence for proving domestic violence has become a lot more strict as well. So unless someone's been beaten up and has a report from their GP or has reported this to the police, they will not be automatically eligible for legal aid if they are poor. So what's going to happen is that I think rather than women will be going to their GP or making reports to the police to be able to be eligible for legal aid for these cases. The other thing that's going to happen is that a lot of people are going to be representing themselves in court because they will not be eligible for legal aid anymore, which will lead to longer court hearings, a lot more time will be wasted in court, and a lot of people will not be prepared to be able to represent themselves in court. For example, I have a lot of clients who are not even, whose English is not up to the mark. So, it will be very difficult for them to present themselves in court. So I think this is one of the things that will happen is that for custody cases and contact with children cases, it will be difficult. Then for financial relief, it will be difficult. Now, the government says that no, for victims of domestic violence, they will still receive legal aid. But, that's not really true because you will have to produce a lot more evidence for domestic violence. So, so what will be happening is that a lot of women will be going to the police, as I said, and the emphasis on mediation then goes away, which the government says, no, we want to mediate, but at the same time, it's counterproductive because people have to make allegations of domestic violence to be able to get legal aid. So that's going to happen. So these are the main areas where these cuts will be affecting them.
Okay, let me bring in Omar Faruk now. Omar, do you think that these cuts can possibly be justified? Isn't it just a straightforward denial of legal access to poor people?
I'm sorry to say, John, but the whole premise upon which you started the questioning and setting the theme seems slightly prejudiced. The first point is that in our country, in England, we spend more than £2 billion each year providing one of the most expensive legal aid systems in the world. And there has never been a substantive review of the entire system to ensure that it's sustainable, proportionate, and affordable. And I want to bring to your and your viewers' attention that per head in England and Wales, we spend about £39 each year, whereas Spain and France spend about £5 each year on legal aid. So that's the first point. The second point is government policies, when they are brought in, it is correct that all of them go through equalities impact analysis and assessment, and this act has gone through it. I agree with Sulema that there have been a number of discussions in Parliament regarding these issues, and there have been a number of amendments which have been introduced to safeguard precisely the people Sulema seems to be concerned about. And this is about access to justice. And let us not forget that ultimately the taxpayer is the one who is responsible for and foots the bill. And there has been abuse of the legal aid system, but not by some lawyers. I myself am a lawyer, but reforms, for example, the direct access scheme by which barristers operate actually should, in theory, reduce costs. Now, coming on to the issue about family cases and so forth, I can only talk about my experience. I had a friend who will remain nameless, went through custody and residency disputes with his ex-wife. And this is what he said. He said, I wish my wife was never funded by legal aid, because funding it by legal aid prolonged the process. And I'm not saying all lawyers, but there are some amongst our profession, whether in the legal profession, whose incentive is to prolong cases and make them costly.
So why, Omar, why is the solution to possible misconduct by lawyers to prevent poor people from being able to employ one? I'm not following you there.
It's not about this. This whole reform isn't about preventing people from having access to justice. It's about efficiency as well as targeting the resources to where they are needed most. And as Sulema has said, to domestic violence and so forth. And the government's policy, it seems to me, and my understanding of it is that to encourage people to mediate and mediate their differences as soon as possible. Whereas if somebody has a blank check for the state to pay for legal disputes, some of which may not be very, very important.
So how will the government discourage rich people from doing this then? It'll discourage poor people from doing it by withdrawing legal aid. But if you're in favour of more mediation and less law, what are they doing about stopping rich people doing this?
I'm not sure what the government is doing, stopping rich people from doing this.
Well, the answer's
but
nothing, isn't it?
What I understand from the scheme of conditional fee agreements is if somebody is eligible for a CFA and they go to a lawyer will take on the case.
Okay. Jonny, let me bring you in about this. Does any of that carry weight with you? Is there a case where this is just a kind of fair-minded attempt to get people to go to mediation when they otherwise might use law, or is that just an excuse for cuts?
I think it's an excuse for cuts. And to start off with, I have to pick up Omar on the 2 billion figure for legal aid, because he's been a bit misleading there and disingenuous. That we're talking about civil legal aid, not criminal legal aid. So criminal legal aid cases are a lot bigger. Civil legal aid pot was only ever 700 million in any case. The 2 billion figure is criminal and civil together. As a barrister, Omar should know that. The government are now cutting back criminal legal aid.
So just to get this straight, does that then mean that the 350 million that they're cutting is only coming out of the 700 million figure? So it's a halving of it?
It's a halving of it, and it's only coming from these civil cases, which are women in domestic violence, clinical negligence, education, social welfare, and the other cases that you led with at the beginning. So that's the first case. In these international comparisons, they do not stand up either. The UK has a different legal system to, say, Holland or Italy or France or New Zealand, which are the same figures that the government would always compare them with. So if you're in Europe, it tends to be the judiciary system. You don't have this advertorial legal system. So it's judges take a decision a lot more. So the time that a case goes to court is a lot shorter. So you're not comparing apples with apples. Those are the first things I'd like to say. Secondly, are you, to me and in my mind, and watching this bill and having campaigned against it all the way through, if you're a politician, you have to do a test. Am I going to save money? Now, the government said they would. Our report with King's College said, no, you won't. You'll have a knock-on cost of 139 million every year, 80 million on the NHS.
Was making.
Yes, which is exactly the same. So already you're just dispersing the problem. Rather than going to a legal aid lawyer, you're dispersing it across the system. So you're not saving money. Do you want to make the system better? Do you want to improve legal aid? Well, how do you improve it when you're eradicating it completely? Because there will not be access. There will not be access for women, for children, for clinical negligence. Third case, do we want to have that idea of rule of law in Britain, where whether you're rich or you're poor, you have access to justice? And that's what Magna Carta is about. All this bill has done is given you a two-tier system. If you're poor, if you're, working class or living on a housing estate, you will not have the £100. You will not have the £500 per hour. So essentially, and no one really talks about this, you've fundamentally changed the society that we're living in, because you'll have the haves who will have the access to a lawyer, and a large sway of the have-nots that will just be left there to either deal with their own problems or, as Lord Neuberger said, take the law into their own hands. And that's what's happening.
Sulema, I mean, the problem is, it seems to me that not just that the people who won't have access to the law are the poor, but they won't have access to the law over the very issues which touch their lives most seriously, to clinical negligence. If a relative of theirs dies in hospital care and they want to challenge that, if over a housing issue or a work-related issue. These are the things that are, they aren't, you might say, all right, they can't pursue a libel case. Well, maybe you'll just have to lump it. But this is things that immediately touch the most serious things.
No, precisely. I think what this law does is that in a way you are creating an imbalance of power. And the people who are already the poorest and the most vulnerable, as well as at least I can talk about family law, which I practice, a lot of women who are, dependent. They are the ones who are going to suffer the most out of everyone else. For example, what about children's cases? Custody contact. Mostly women are primary carers. Women are the ones who are economically dependent, who don't earn any money. So most of these cases where legal aid will not be available will be for women who are poor and who are looking, or single mothers. So, they are the most vulnerable citizens in our society. So, and this law is going to affect them, it'll be the harshest on them, first of all. Secondly, you are looking at women and domestic violence. So, while at the same time the government says, oh, we want to have mediation, yet they say, look, you will only be allowed legal aid if there is if you can prove domestic violence. So have you made a criminal complaint? Have you gone and spoken to your GP? Now, I deal with a lot of women who are Asian women, for example, from South Asia, and most of these women are poor. They're economically dependent completely on their families, and they have cultural restrictions. They do not make criminal complaints. They just in almost all my cases, no one has made criminal complaints of domestic violence. So what do? They will be now forced to do that, and I'm saying that it's a good thing that they do, but it's not. It doesn't happen in that culture.
And also the police's record on dealing with these things is not exactly
record. And
marvelous.
Also imagine for that person, it's very, very difficult because she doesn't want to do that and only wants to do that as a last resort, because he's the father of her children and she doesn't want him to have a criminal record, or you have to go to your GP. So I think that's an imbalance of power.
So in fact, what you're saying is that rather than more mediation, what will actually happen is a more brutal process with the authorities.
Exactly, and you will be making. And what about, for example, domestic violence is not just physical violence; it is economic deprivation. It is psychologically torturing someone or harming someone. How do you prove that? So it's very difficult to convince your GP that, oh, I'm suffering from anxiety or something. Okay, maybe they will be going to do that then. Or what about, how do you prove that economically you have been dependent, which a lot of my clients, for example, have had that they come from Pakistan or India or Bangladesh, and when they're here on spouse visas, economically they're not given any money, they're kept in the house, they're not allowed to go out. So, I mean, that is a form of domestic violence too. What is what do they do? How do they prove that? So I think a lot of these things have, not been thought through, and you will see that in the next months. I think there will be things that will be coming out of this, and things that, people haven't even thought about at this point. And I think the other thing that you kind of touched upon was that it's not just family and this. I mean, everything affects each other. So if you fail to resolve one issue, it will lead to another issue. And then that will lead to another issue. For example, you do not resolve a domestic violence issue because, she doesn't want to make a police complaint. Then what happens is that could lead to a housing issue because eventually she gets kicked out. And then that could lead to an immigration issue because she's on a spousal visa. So how are you saving money? It's leading to a lot. If you could have stopped it there, those issues could have been contained.
Jonny, what about the political process here? Because I mean, it's pretty unusual for the Lords to to kick something back 13 times for senior figures to be intervening against the government. How much chance is there of this being derailed at some point?
I think the interesting thing about this bill is it had the biggest defeats in 60 years of any bill. And the government had thought it would go through in 3 months, and it took close to 18 months to go through. The other interesting split that I saw was you had people like Lord Tebbit and Lord Newton, who were in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet, who were actually arguing against the cuts and were standing up saying the figures aren't right, the impact assessment doesn't work, you're picking on families, you're picking on women. So there was a real split between the Conservatives in, say, the new Conservatives who are in Parliament and the old Conservatives. The politics of it now, my view is the Lib Dems, a lot of ways, they facilitated this bill going through. You had Lord McNally pushing it all the way. You had Tom Brake standing on the side, so they've got something to answer for. Labour have said they will change, but I think if you want to see legal aid come back in any form that will work for everybody, and because of this process, and if there is one light, there's plenty of analysis of where the legal aid bill and budget should go and how it works. But I think people need to start questioning Labour. Don't take it for granted that Labour will do something. People like Andy Slaughter and Sadiq Khan need to come out and say, we will do X, Y, Z, and define what they'll do. Because if not, 5-10 years down the line, this situation, we'll be living without legal aid, and this two-tier legal system in the UK will be going on.
What will it do to, I mean, I don't think there's going to be much sort of open weeping in the streets about the fate of lawyers, but what will it do to legal practices, the cut in legal aid? There's been quite a lot of talk about it actually eradicating lawyers who depend on it.
Well, I think a lot of legal, at least family law firms, there has been a huge reduction already in a lot of firms who provide legal aid work. And I think that one of the things which is a misconception, and I think that, and the public is not very well informed about it, is that a lot of lawyers who do this kind of work do not just do it for the money. People say, it's a way of lawyers to make some money, and I think, yes, he also said the same thing. Well, I mean, similar thing. And I think that that's very wrong. For example, I was a corporate lawyer. I left my work. I was getting paid 4 times more than what legal aid rates are. But people do this work also because they want to give back to society. This is not very well paid work. And it is not well paid at all for lawyers. You will see a lot of people who are doing legal aid work, they're not being paid well. They would rather be doing private work. So I think, why should people do legal aid work? I think people will start doing more private work, and what will happen is that that will create vacuums in certain areas. For example, in certain areas of England, people will have to go much further away to find a legal aid lawyer who does that. So it will create deserts, in certain areas where people will simply not have that service available.
Or they take the law into their own hand.
And how will this affect the immigration law? I mean, that's another area that's going to be deprived of legal aid funding, isn't it?
Yes, I mean that is. I mean, I'm not exactly sure of exactly what will happen, but there will be people who will be deprived of it, and I think what will happen is that people will have to become a little more desperate and take things in their own hands and represent themselves, which will have its own problems.
Jonny, there should be the basis of quite a strong campaign here, shouldn't there? Because there's a lot of very poor people who are going to be excluded who will care about this. There's obviously some lawyers who desperately want to defend the legal aid system and who are trained in the arts of argument. Isn't that the basis for quite a lot of campaigning?
Yeah, there is indeed. But I think what you're seeing at the moment, what I find looking more and more as we go into the political phase that we're going through, is the progressives and people on the left. I find them very good at single issue campaigns, but not united around one voice, or not particularly connected in with the Labour Party in many ways, or they don't see the Labour Party as leading them. So until progressives on the left find some platform or some way to come together, then it's hard for them to campaign to restore this. I think in the right of politics, under the threat of cuts, and this general shift to the right that I think you've seen in US politics and in politics across Europe ever since 2008, you're seeing the right a lot more with a very simple mandate. We must cut, forget about society, forget about impacts. That's the trend that you're seeing on. What I would hope in the future is that in the UK, that you would see the Labour Party reaching out more and understanding more about the way that progressives are. You see these polls saying Labour will win the next election of 41%. That's only a poll. I think on the street, automatically say because you think the government is wrong and cuts on legal aid, it doesn't mean automatically you're going to vote for the Labour Party.
So what do you think ought to be done in terms of trying to stop this now?
Well, I think there needs to be obviously a cohesion of people that need to come together, and I think various organizations have already done bits of work, but things need to be thought through. I think things are not thought through, and I don't think the government has been able to tap into those organizations. For example, Rights of Women. I mean, they've done a consultation on it, and they are precisely the sort of organization who deal with women who are going to be suffering, from these kind of legal aid cuts. And I think those are the things that have to be thought through by the government.
Like the government don't have an interest in tapping into people like Rights of Women or the campaign groups because they're going to say contradictory to what the government want to happen.
And I think that it sounds very good, cut it and blame the lawyers and this and that. But really, what are you doing? Have you thought it through? Will you be making savings? I mean, look at all the research that's done out there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it shows that, I mean, if you look at what Lord Neuberger said and various other research that has been done, it shows that the government will actually not be making savings. Things are going to be counterproductive. And I've seen myself with my own cases that where you come across a litigant in person, it takes a lot more of the court time. So that is very expensive. So where are the savings? I mean, are we so sure that we are going to make these savings?
And briefly, we've only got about 30 seconds left, but Jonny, do you think this is one of those cases where, I mean, a lot of people make this case about other cuts as well, that the government, it talks efficiency, but really what it means is ideology, that it wants a war on the poorest sections of the population, and it doesn't really care if it's efficient.
To me, this is ideological. It takes away, their voice, their right to their services, their right to having justice. So it is a complete attack on that. And I think you'll see the impacts of this will be a lot bigger than we think.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but no doubt we'll be returning to the question of legal aid in future programmes. So do rejoin us for another edition of the Politics and Media programme next week.